The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, Chicago is experiencing a bloodbath, a crime epidemic. President Donald Trump seems poised to move the National Guard to Chicago, which he has the authority to do by declaring it a national emergency. Let's listen to the president.
Make your mind up on Chicago, though?
Well, we're going in. I didn't say when. We're going in. When you lose, look, I have an obligation. This isn't a political thing. I have an obligation. When we lose, when 20 people are killed over the last 2.5 weeks and 75 are shot with bullets. So let me tell you a little story about a place called D.C., District of Columbia, right here where we are. It's now a safe zone. We have no crime. It's in such great shape. You can go and actually walk with your children, your wife, your husband. You can walk right down the middle of the street. You're not going to be shot, Peter. You're safe.
I think the president's made it very clear that he's preparing to move on Chicago. As I said, Chicago experienced a bloodbath over the Labor Day weekend. 52 people shot, 8 people killed, 4 mass shootings. Now, just looking at last year, there were 225,000 911 calls to the Chicago police that went completely unanswered. The police force itself is down by 1,600 police officers. Nobody will apply for those jobs. We'll talk later in the show with former Chicago Police Superintendent Richard Brezek, who will tell us exactly why that is. There are 90% of the violent criminals who are arrested are back out on the street with a cashless bail system. 67,000 criminals skipped out on their follow-up hearings, yet Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson continue to reject help from the Trump administration. Listen to Mayor Johnson.
Are you prepared to defend this land that was built by slaves, a land that was built by indigenous people, a land that is built by workers? Are you prepared to defend this land? The people united will always prevail. I need you all to stand firm, to stand strong if this president decides to continue to break this Constitution.
This is a man completely out of control. I would argue that that's the mayor of Chicago who is advocating insurrection. The president of the United States has full legal authority to declare a national emergency. The statistics that I just read to you show that Chicago is experiencing an emergency, and I predict right here and now that he will mobilize the National Guard and they will restore safety to the streets of Chicago. The president cited the example of the District of Columbia. If you look at the comments of actual residents of D.C., they're very pleased with the fact that the president has moved the National Guard in and he has restored safety. But his crime turned Chicago upside down. J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Johnson vehemently refused the cooperation of the National Guard and ICE agents to protect the streets. You see, they care more about their political party and their leftist ideology than they do protecting their constituents. The people of Chicago and liberal cities across the country are getting a rude awakening that they are doomed to live in dangerous conditions as long as Democrats are in charge. Again, later on in the show, former Chicago Superintendent of Police Richard Brezek joins us to give us an expert analysis of the situation in the Windy City. Meanwhile, I was in touch with the family of Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Many of you know the mayor was injured in a car accident several days ago. The good news is the mayor is on the mend. He's doing fine. He's one tough son of a gun who has been a target of political persecution and prosecution. Why? Because he vigorously represented the interests of his client as an attorney. President Trump has done the right thing by deciding to award the Presidential Medal of Freedom to America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, after it was announced that the mayor suffered in this car accident and left him with major spinal injuries. I'm proud to say that I was a volunteer in Rudy Giuliani's first campaign for mayor. He was elected mayor of New York City in his second try, and he is, as the president has said, the greatest mayor in the history of New York City. He was also an equally great American patriot. The president said both of those things. Rudy Giuliani became the mayor of New York City in 1993 when he instituted the tough law and order policies that cleaned the city up and resulted in the revitalization of Times Square. After 9/11, he showed the true grit that he has. It was Giuliani's leadership that kept the country together during one of its darkest times. Then, after the stolen election of 2020, Giuliani stepped up again and led the efforts to oppose the fraud that I believe robbed President Trump of his rightful second term in the White House. Few in government, few in the country have done more to defend freedom and stand up against injustice than my friend Rudy Giuliani. I am praying for a speedy recovery, as I'm certain all Americans and all New Yorkers join me. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has ordered the removal of gender ideology from the public schools. President Trump has now ordered that this ideology, gender nonsense, be removed from public schools, threatening to withhold federal funds from public schools that refuse to comply. President Trump told his Department of Health and Human Services to direct 46 states and territories to eliminate any reference to gender ideology from their school curriculums and materials, or they would lose federal funding. The Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families terminated a grant in California last week after they refused to remove gender ideology from their materials, showing that the Trump administration means business. Acting Assistant Secretary Andrew Gradison said, "Accountability is coming. Federal funds will not be used to poison the minds of the next generation or advance dangerous ideological agendas. The Trump administration will ensure that the policies of this department reflect the intent of Congress, not the priorities of the radical left." Gender ideology was always a project that was funded by the government and so-called nonprofits funded by leftist billionaires like George Soros. It was never organic. It was thrust upon society by a cabal of extremely evil, child-abusing, demonic monsters. We must not forget who these people are in the months to come as the shoe drops and the prosecutions of some of these people transpire. Meanwhile, Robert Mueller, the so-called head of the Mueller witch hunt, has begged off on a subpoena from the House Oversight Committee investigating why Jeffrey Epstein, the child sex trafficker and pedophile, was given a mere slap on the wrist back in 2005. Robert Mueller's family says that he's too sick with Parkinson's to testify. As Joe Biden himself, who was clearly non-compos mentis virtually during his entire time as president, this sounds like malarkey to me. I do remember that during the congressional hearings in which they tried to reinflate the Russian collusion hoax, that Robert Mueller seemed non-compos mentis. When asked specifically about the prosecutor in my case and the fact that her name was Jeannie Rhee, had represented Hillary Clinton in the so-called illegal email server case, therefore had a bias against me since I wrote extensively about that case in my book, The Clintons' War on Women, which was an Amazon bestseller, as well as commenting on it in many interviews and print pieces at my website. Mueller said that he was unaware of that. So let me get this straight. Robert Mueller didn't know what his own law partner had done, didn't know that his own law partner had represented Hillary Clinton and therefore had a conflict of interest in my case. No, I believe that the House Oversight Committee has made a mistake in withdrawing the subpoena. In fact, I believe Robert Mueller should be compelled to testify, and if he refuses to do so, well, then he should be charged just like Peter Navarro was. In the meantime, Democrats, state representatives in Michigan are grooming children for transgender mutilation, reaching out directly to kids, telling them they can get their drugs right there in the state. This state representative, Carrie Reagans, said, I am recording a video today to talk to you trans kids here in Michigan. I want you to know that the care you might want for gender-affirming care is legal in Michigan and is still continuing in a wide variety of places. The grown-ups at the University of Michigan Hospital are now under court order or anything. They are choosing to stop providing this care because they're scared of losing millions and millions of dollars from Medicare and Medicaid, which pays a lot of the services at the University of Michigan. So Representative Reagans told children to reach out to her office and she would help them in the grooming process for transgenderism. This is why merely defunding this transgender network is not enough. The proponents of transgenderism, which is, by the way, 0.8% of the U.S. population, particularly those who are pushing it on children, must be charged and imprisoned and treated as the sex offenders that they really are. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is triggered. You might notice that Bernie Sanders used to criticize millionaires and billionaires, but now Bernie Sanders only criticizes billionaires. Why is that? Well, that's because Bernie Sanders and his wife skimmed millions of dollars from his two presidential campaigns in the form of media placement fees. That means Bernie Sanders is a millionaire. You see, Bernie wants socialism for ye, but not for Comrade Bernie. Comrade Bernie has 3 vacation homes. He's driving a top-of-the-line Mercedes. You see, this whole nonsense of socialism, that's for the proletariat, but not for Comrade Bernie. When we come back, I want to talk about how Bernie Sanders has been triggered by Robert F. Kennedy's swamp draining at the Center for Disease Control. Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, despite his denials, has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from executives with Big Pharma and is part of the ever-enduring swamp of Washington, D.C. You're listening to the Stone Zone right here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. When we come back, we'll talk about this struggle between Senator Bernie Sanders and these attacks on HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. And also at the later in the show, we bring you the former superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, Richard Brezak, who's going to tell us exactly what's going on in the ground in Chicago and why he supports the idea of President Trump mobilizing the National Guard and sending them to the Windy City. We'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple.
Welcome back in the Stone Zone. I have to say that in a 50-year career in American politics, I've never seen a phonier, more pompous windbag, a greater loudmouth than Senator Bernie Sanders. And in all honesty, watching his public filings where he says he's only worth $3 million, I kind of doubt that is the case. If you look at the Federal Election Commission reports regarding payments to a company that he and his wife formed, he took far more than that out in terms of payments in media placement fees from his 2 presidential campaigns. Given the fact that he's actually never had a job in the private sector, that prior to his service in the U.S. Senate, he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, I find his filings to be questionable. But now he's attacking the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy, for fulfilling his mandates to drain the public health swamp by firing entrenched government bureaucrats. Sanders said, despite the overwhelming opposition of the medical community, Secretary Kennedy has continued his long-standing crusade against vaccinations and his advocacy of conspiracy theories that have been rejected repeatedly by scientific experts. Sanders called for RFK to resign. I'm calling for Senator Bernie Sanders to resign. You see, RFK Jr. has been a long-standing opponent to Big Pharma. Sanders, while proclaiming himself to be a socialist, has actually been one of the biggest single recipients of Big Pharma campaign dollars. That has caused him to toe the line, refuse to speak to Big Pharma's immense profit-seeking motives in pushing their unproven, untested, dangerous vaccinations onto the unsuspecting masses of the American people. This is not disputable. The vaccinations went through no clinical trials. Secondarily, those who manufactured the vaccinations had no legal liability. Thus, it is outrageous that Bernie Sanders, who is an immense hypocrite and a total fraud, is attacking RFK, like all socialists. This is why Bernie Sanders, who ran for president as an opponent of war and as an opponent of the trade policies of the previous administration, is such a fraud. It's interesting to me that 1 out of 3 Sanders voters ended up voting for Donald Trump in 2016. Yet they stole the nomination for Bernie Sanders not once, but twice. Yet he turned around and first he endorsed Hillary Clinton, then he endorsed Joe Biden. So he has now, I think, been overshadowed by the likes of the Ayatollah Zoran Mamdani, and his movement is being co-opted for those who are more involved in Islamic zealotry. But Bernie Sanders' idea that he's somehow against special interests or dark money, when in fact he is the recipient of both. Really an extraordinarily exposed fraud at this point. Thanks for tuning in to the Stone Zone. When we come back, the former superintendent of the Chicago Police, Richard Brezak, joins us to talk about what's going on in the Windy City and why he supports the notion of President Donald Trump moving the National Guard into Chicago to restore safety to that community. We'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. I'm joined now by Richard Brezak. Richard Brezak joined the Chicago Police Department as a simple patrol officer in 1964, rising through the ranks to become the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department from 1980 to 1983, serving under Chicago's last great mayor, Jane Byrne. I'm very honored to have Richard Brezak join us today in the Stone Zone. Mr. Superintendent, welcome to the zone.
Thank you, Roger. It's great to be here. I hear all wonderful things about you and your program, so it's a privilege for me to be here.
So I'm very interested in your expert opinion. We saw the statistics over Labor Day, 52 people shot, 8 killed, 4 mass shootings. There clearly is a crime problem in the Windy City, even though the current mayor, Brandon Johnson, and Governor J.B. Pritzker seem to want to deny that. The president indicated in comments earlier today that he's made a decision to send the National Guard. He just hasn't decided when. What is your professional assessment of the current situation in Chicago, and how do you feel about this decision by the president?
Well, first of all, the current situation in Chicago is a disaster. There's no place even close to it throughout the country. And it has become that way actually dating back to the second Richie Daley regime. Now, I'm not talking about the father who died in 76. I'm talking about the offspring who became mayor in 89, and then I think he left sometime around 11 or so when Rahm Emanuel took over. There is an inherent dislike of the police by City Hall, starting with Richie Daley. It didn't even happen under Harold Washington. He's the one who started it because he always looked at the police as being potential problems, which he's never brilliant enough to serve or to deal with those problems and to make the appropriate decisions. So we got Daley starting it, and he started it with what are called merit promotions. That means people who can't pass promotional exams are promoted from police officer to sergeant to lieutenant to captain based upon merit. Merit is a euphemism for clout. You have a political sponsor, you can go from police officer to captain without ever passing an exam. So there's no real measure of any degree of competency or intelligence among the supervisory and command staff. I'm not saying all of them are bad, but they have given up those barometers in the interest of politics. As a result, that demoralizes all police officers except the beneficiaries of the political influence. So why should they have an interest in what goes on in the city They're basically there doing a job, collecting their paycheck, and it's all at a minimum. Your comment in the Newsmax publication about their difficulty in getting recruits, people to come into the police department, is nothing new, because they know that the politicians, City Hall primarily, the mayor's administration, is not going to stand behind them. They've been working for at least maybe 10 years, a decade already, under a consent decree that was initiated by the then Attorney General of Illinois, a Democrat Attorney General who's in private practice now, and she is the daughter of the convicted former Speaker of the House who's on his way to the penitentiary. So, the incestual relationships there just go on and on. So what happens is, they don't care about the crime. It doesn't make any difference how many people are shot, how many people are killed, or in any way hurt, injured. Last place I lived in Chicago was in River North, which was an upscale downtown neighborhood. And that place has gone to hell because there is no policing going on. The police don't care because City Hall doesn't care. And, of course, it drives out the businesses. I mean, you see the kind of intellectual acumen you had with Lori Lightfoot when she said, let them riot on the Magnificent Mile. The owners have insurance. Well, Lightfoot's not paying for the insurance. The owners are. And, when you have claims, insurance rates go up. So this thing is a major, major disaster at this point. President Trump, is probably the personification of leadership, especially in the political world. And I think that my statement, you can either look at it as an echo of what some world leaders have said, or at least being congruent with what world leaders have said. He is the number one leader in the world, and probably of the world right now. And what he is looking at is the neoplasms, the cancers that are in the United States of America. And the tumors, if you look at the map, the real tumors are the blue state major cities, Chicago, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver. Go right down the line, and they're all controlled by Democrat politicians who, as we know, when you talk about they're denying the crime there, denial is probably their most benign form of lying. They're really good at lying. They're really good at name calling. If you disagree with somebody because of their skin color, you're a racist. If you disagree with a Democrat on an economic or a social issue, you're a fascist. They've got a whole appendum of words from the vernacular for labeling people. But the problem is that they know these words well because they practice it, as opposed to the people that they are accusing of being that. So you've got this disastrous situation, and you had one similar to it in Washington, D.C., and we all know what the results are. And in Chicago, it's probably worse because it's bigger, and it's been around longer than the problem in Washington. And there's another difference. Mayor Bowser in Washington, I think, jumped on the bandwagon with President Trump and worked to straighten out Washington, D.C. and its crime issue with lightning speed. The thing is that in Chicago, which is the nucleus of the new Democrat Party, it may, in the old Mayor Daley, it may have been personified by him because all the presidential candidates came in and paid homage to him for his support. Well, that's been changed because those Democrats, nobody really had an issue with at that time as much as they do now, because now Democrat is the euphemism for communist or Marxist or socialist. That's what it is. So, the Democrats today are really insulting the corpses and the souls of Richard J. Daley, Fiorello LaGuardia, people like that throughout the United States. Now, what's happening is Chicago right now is really, putting its chest up against the president's efforts. And what I thought is interesting is that the Chicago toilet paper, which is the label I give to the Chicago Tribune, had an editorial sent out by email this evening, which I read, and they're making a point that Pritzker and Let's Go Brandon Johnson, are ignoring the crime problem. Well, that's nothing new. You talk about crime. Pritzker took a bunch of toilets out of a mansion that he purchased, and then he had his mansion reassessed by the county assessor to get his taxes reduced. Here's a guy who's a billionaire, and he's playing a system to get a small break on his real estate taxes. It's criminal. I don't know how but everybody got a pass because everything is controlled by the Democrats in Cook County. So you've got that issue. But then you have Brandon Johnson there. The thing is, he should be the poster boy for the Chicago public school system. He went to the Chicago public schools. He taught in the Chicago public schools. He was a union rep for the Chicago Teachers Union, and it was the Chicago Teachers Union that really got him into office. But he's the poster boy because the school system in Chicago has been a failure for decades, and he personifies that failure. And then, what I thought was funny is when he made the comment about President Trump that white men are jealous of the intellectualism of black men. He made that comment about a week or two ago. You know what he never learned wherever he went through school is the motto of the United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. And that's what he's doing with his mind. He's wasting it on nonsense because he thinks he's hot stuff. He's the mayor. But they got their chest up because they are the pawns for whom else but Barack Obama.
Yeah,
they are the pawns for him.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement. I thought Lori Lightfoot was the worst mayor in Chicago history until this guy got elected. In all honesty, if Brandon Johnson's IQ was 1 point lower, you'd have to water him like a plant. 3 weeks ago, he said that the rising crime problem, I swear to God, it was the fault of Richard Nixon. I have no idea what this guy is talking about. And now he and J.B. Pritzker seem to be in complete denial. Pritzker came out 2 days ago and said that the crime numbers are coming down, when, of course, they're not. I was on a podcast yesterday with a liberal who said J.B. Pritzker should be on Mount Rushmore. I said, if you put Pritzker on Mount Rushmore, there wouldn't be room for anybody else. These people are beyond belief. Last year, 2023, there were 225,000 911 calls to the Chicago Police Department that went completely and totally unanswered. That's because, as you underlined, the total number of police officers is down by 1,600 officers because of that consent decree. Nobody wants to apply for these jobs because they know the politicians don't have their back. Nobody wants to become a police officer because they know the elected officials will not stand up for them. Meanwhile, 67,000 criminals skipped out on their subsequent hearings after Illinois followed New York in the disastrous decision to do away with cash bail. Hasn't worked in New York City, hasn't worked in New York State, isn't working today in Chicago. J.B. Pritzker thinks he can launch a presidential campaign on the basis of this disaster. My sources tell me that Mayor Johnson is in and out of the hospital constantly with panic attacks brought on by the stress of being mayor of one of the greatest cities in America. Richard J. Daley, not Richie Daley, but Richard J. Daley, Dick Daley, who was mayor during the 1968 Democratic Convention, was one of the greatest mayors in the country. Chicago worked. I say that as a Republican, but you're right. The old Democrat Party, the party of John F. Kennedy, the party of Harry Truman, the party that believed in capitalism, the party that believed in a strong national defense, the party that believed in God, the party that believed in free enterprise, that party no longer exists. That party, thanks to Barack Hussein Obama, has been taken over by a radical clique of Marxists, of which Brandon Johnson is just another member. The Democratic Socialists of America, of which Johnson is affiliated, says in their platform they want to do away with the police. They want to do away with the prison system. They want to do away with the justice system. And that we cannot have true equality as long as we have police officers. This is the ideology of today's Democrat Party. That's what's driving this crime problem in one of America's greatest cities. I'm really honored, Mr. Superintendent, to have you with us today. Richard Brezek is our guest. You're listening to the Stone Zone right here on the Red Apple Audio Network. When we come back, we're going to dig a little deeper into the so-called Code of Silence that is part of being a police officer in Chicago. I'm going to ask Richard Brezek, the former superintendent of Chicago Police, to explain this to us and how it has contributed to the troubling lack of public faith in law enforcement in the Windy City. Whatever you do, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with more right here in the Stone Zone.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. I'm joined by the former superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, Richard Brezek, who has been helping us break down the situation in the Windy City. I want to ask you very specifically, you've spoken publicly about the Code of Silence being part of a police officer in the city of Chicago. Can you speak to this Code of Silence and how it has contributed to the troubling lack of public faith in law enforcement?
Sure. I don't want to mitigate any of that Code of Silence, but it's not unique to police. As we all know from, the general press, the Roman Catholic Church has had its problems with the Code of Silence and priest pedophiles. Undertakers take care of the Code of Silence with the doctors and the doctors' mistakes. So you can go any place with this stuff. Go to Congress. There's a lot of Code of Silence going on over there too.
Yes, sir.
But with the police, it basically is that if you see wrongdoing, you look the other way. Okay, you don't report it. And actually, there's a couple of considerations. One is, if you look at Title 18, United States Code, Section 4, it's called misprision of felony. If you fail to report the felony of which you have notice to the nearest U.S. Attorney's Office, you can be indicted and convicted of that felony. And police officers in Chicago have been convicted of misprision of felony. Code of Silence, there was information brought to me back in 1982 regarding the purported mistreatment of two prisoners. I wrote a letter to Daley, who was the state's attorney at the time, the prosecutor. He did nothing. That letter still haunts him till this day, although he's had enough people, with powder puffs giving him enough makeup so he looks good. But the thing is, when it comes to Code of Silence, the classic case in recent memory in Chicago happened under Rahm Emanuel, and Gary McCarthy was the superintendent. A kid by the name of Laquan McDonald was shot 16 times by a single police officer from among 12, 15 police officers at the scene. He was shot, actually, after he went down. You could see the video. He was still shooting him, and the body was bouncing in the street. What happened there, nobody knew the video was going on because they would deactivate the videos before they went out on the street, and nobody did anything about it. But when this thing happened, Rahm Emanuel paid the family $5 million without a lawsuit being filed. And then they sat on the video until an independent photographer filed a Freedom of Information Act request, which was denied, and a circuit court judge in Cook County granted his petition, said that he's entitled to have the video released to him. Well, the day before they released the video, the state's attorney's office which is in the back pocket of the politicians in Democrat Cook County, indicted the shooting officer, the officer who fired the shots. And that case, it was notorious all over the world. There were 4 other officers, very low ranking, who got indicted for obstructing justice because they supposedly did something wrong. All of the brass got off the hook. They were permitted to retire and all that without any consequences. McCarthy saw that video, according to what I read, he said, like within 12 hours after the shooting, which would have been about 9:30 the following morning. And yet, nothing was done in connection with that investigation. That was the kind of investigation where the video told the whole story, and it could have been done within 30 to 60 days. But yet, it went on for a long time because Emanuel was up for re-election.
All right, we have to leave it there, I'm afraid. They withheld that for over a year and a half. I want to thank our guest, Richard Brizek, the former superintendent of the Chicago Police, for joining us today in the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?